The night of the mating ceremony, I stood at the long window of my hall and watched the sea. It was doing what it always did in the last weeks of autumn, throwing itself against the base of the cliff in gray, churning swells, spray catching the iron lantern light from the lower casements, and dissolving into nothing before it reached the glass. My council had lit every candle in the hall. They had arranged the benches in formal rows. They had brought in 3 women from allied packs, daughters of the northern wolves, the eastern ridge, the inland forest, and dressed the hall in the gray and black banners of Vaelthur as though the kingdom itself were performing. I watched the sea because I could not watch the hall. My wolf was not sitting quietly the way it usually did before ceremony. It was pacing. I felt it move in the back of my chest, that low, restless circuit it made when something was not right, not danger, not an approaching threat, but some displacement it could not name. I had felt it for weeks. I had assumed it was the ceremony itself. I had never wanted a mating event, had told my council as much, had been overruled on the grounds that Vaelthur needed succession, and its alpha king was 37 years old and past the time for delaying. I turned from the window when my steward appeared at the far door. "The hall is ready, my lord." I nodded, straightened the clasp at my shoulder, and walked to meet my fate. I did not know then that my fate was not in the first 3 rows. It was in the back of the hall, setting out the last of the candles. Let me tell it from the beginning. The way it actually started, not with the ceremony, but with a morning 3 weeks before it, when my head of household came to me in the corridor, with a look on his face like a man delivering an inconvenient report. "We've taken on a seasonal worker," Aldrin said. "A woman. Packless came up from the eastern coast. She asked to work passage to the northern holds, says she has family there. I've put her with the hall staff." I did not think much of it. Vaelthur took seasonal workers every autumn. The hold was too large for the standing household alone to maintain before the long gray months. "What's her skill?" "Everything," Aldrin said, which was not a useful answer, and then amended it. "Hall setting, cooking, repairs, sorting." She asked for the jobs nobody wanted. I told him to put her to work and thought nothing more of it. The first time I saw her, I was crossing the inner courtyard at first light, on my way to the morning training ground, and she was hauling a load of firewood from the yard stack to the kitchen door alcove. Not struggling with it, managing it. 4 split logs balanced against her arm in a way that said she knew exactly how to distribute the weight. Her hair was tied back tightly against the sea wind. She wore a plain gray wool overgarment, the kind the hall staff wore, and she did not look up when I crossed the courtyard. My wolf went very still. Not the pacing restless still it had been for weeks, a different kind, a listening kind. I kept walking. I told myself it was nothing. My wolf was unsettled before the ceremony, and it was finding things to fasten onto. But I noticed after that I knew when she was in a room. Not because she made herself known, she did not. She was quiet in the particular way that competent people are quiet. She moved through the work without commentary, finished what she began, did not ask anyone to admire it. I would come into the great hall to review the week's stores and find the candle stands repositioned, so the light fell more evenly across the tables. I would walk past the corridor to the lower hall and smell the stone salt damp replaced by something cleaner, pine resin and wood smoke, because she had relayed the central brazier. Small things. The kind of things you only notice when they are done right. I did not speak to her for the first 10 days. On the 11th day, I came into the kitchen yard at midday to settle a dispute about the winter provisions. Aldrin and my provisions master had reached an impasse about salt storage, and she was there, at the long yard table, mending a tear in one of the hall curtains with a needle and a very particular economy of movement. She looked up when I came in, made a small acknowledging nod, and went back to the curtain. Aldrin and the provisions master were talking. My wolf was not listening to them. It was watching her. She glanced up a second time and caught me looking, and there was nothing in her expression, No alarm, no performance of deference, no attempt to be unobtrusive. Just a steady, gray-eyed meeting of the gaze, brief, and then her eyes went back to her work. I made a decision about the salt storage and left the yard. That evening I asked Aldrin in passing where the new seasonal woman came from. Eastern Coast, he said, pack of Grayfin. She left them a season back. And then, with the careful neutrality of a man who knew I did not enjoy being given unnecessary information, she had a situation there, a betrothal that didn't hold. She doesn't say much about it. I told him to keep me informed of any unusual situations in the household and walked away. I heard the rest of it from Elva, my head of kitchen, who told me without being asked, 3 days later, because Elva believed strongly that I should know the things my household knew and did not always wait to be consulted. Her name is Wren, Elva said, setting a covered pot on the side table and lifting the lid to check it. Daughter of a Grayfin merchant family. They arranged her betrothal 2 years ago, a good match, or it seemed like one. Then the family's wool contracts failed and they owed money to 3 different trade holds, and when the truth came out at the ceremony, the other pack broke the agreement on the spot, right there in the hall. The father of the other family stood up before the whole gathering and said he had no interest in buying his son a bankrupt bride. She replaced the lid. They sent her out of the hall while everyone was still sitting there, Elva said. The doors closed, and when they opened again, everyone left without her. The kitchen was warm and smelled of salt bread. Outside, the wind was doing what it did in autumn, driving off the gray sea in long, cold gusts that found every gap in the stone. I thought about a woman walking out of a hall full of people who had watched her shamed and said nothing. I thought about her arriving at Vailthor's service gate with nothing but a request for seasonal work. I thought about the way she had met my eyes in the kitchen yard and not looked away. My wolf was very still. She works well, Elva said. Better than most of the seasonals. She doesn't complain and she doesn't ask for credit. She's a good woman, my lord, and she's had a hard year. I thanked Elva for the information and went to stand at the hall window and watched the sea for a long time. The next days, I spent learning the shape of how she moved through the hold. Not watching her, I was careful about that, careful not to make something awkward of an already unusual situation. But there is a difference between watching and noticing, and I noticed. She had a system. She worked from the most difficult tasks to the easiest, not the other way around, which meant she was never tired when the day's final accounting happened. She did not waste steps. When she spoke to the other hall workers, she was brief but not unkind, and they respected it. There was no flicker of resentment in how they treated her, which meant she had earned the position she occupied. She asked for the jobs nobody wanted, Aldrin had said. She was scrubbing the stone drainage channels in the lower hall on the 5th day after I learned her name, a task that most of the permanent household avoided by assignment of seniority. I came by on my way to the armory and slowed. She was on her knees on the stone with a brush and a bucket, working steadily, and she looked up when my step fell differently. The same gray-eyed look, the same brief acknowledgement. I stopped. "How long have you worked drainage channels?" I asked. She considered this for a moment as though she was deciding how much information the question warranted. "My family's hold had a wine cellar," she said. "The drainage there was worse than this. Twice the length, half the pitch. This is easy." She said it plainly, not proudly, just accurately. "You don't have to take the difficult tasks," I said. "I prefer them," she said. "Easy tasks leave time to think about things you'd rather not think about." She paused. "My lord." It was the first complete conversation we had had, and she went back to the drainage channel, and I went to the armory, and my wolf walked circuits in my chest for the rest of the afternoon. The formal presentation was 12 days away. My counsel had been thorough. The 3 candidate families had confirmed their daughters' attendance. The ceremony itself would follow the old form. The presenting family would introduce their daughter, The pack would assemble in the hall, and the Alpha King's wolf would assess. If the wolf reacted, the bonding sign, the old recognition that no amount of politics could substitute, then the match was true. If not, courtesy would prevail and the gathering would end without conclusion. It was, as my counsel saw it, a reasonable system. 3 chances, 3 allied families, at least one bond might take. I had attended enough of these ceremonies for other packs to know that the wolf's reaction was not guaranteed. Sometimes the bond simply wasn't present. The packs went home politely. The Alpha King remained unmated. These things happened. My wolf was still pacing. I went to find Wren. She was in the upper storerooms, recataloguing the autumn preserves, and she looked up from the ledger she was using to track the jars without particular surprise. I leaned against the doorframe. "When do you plan to leave for the northern holds?" I asked. She set the ledger down. "I was hoping to work through the first of winter and leave when the roads clear in early spring, if that's acceptable." "It's acceptable. What family do you have in the north?" A brief pause. "A cousin," she said. "She married into a northern pack 3 years ago. I've never visited. I thought it was time." She did not say, "I have nowhere else to go." She did not say, "The eastern coast is closed to me now." She said none of it, but it was all present in the pause. "You're welcome to stay until spring," I said. "Thank you, my lord." I was going to leave. My wolf stopped pacing. It did something I had never felt it do before. It went very still and then, slowly, laid down. In the back of my chest, that internal creature that had been restless for weeks simply settled, as though it had reached a decision. I stayed in the doorframe a moment longer than I should have. "What was his name?" I said. "The man whose family broke the betrothal." Her expression didn't change exactly, but something shifted in the gray of her eyes. Not grief. She was past grief, I thought. Something more like a woman looking at a closed door. "Castle Holt," she said, "heir to the Holt Eastern Ridge pack." "Were you?" I stopped. It wasn't my business. "No," she said quietly. "I had not fallen in love with him. I had agreed to the arrangement because my family needed the match to hold. When it didn't, she paused. I was not heartbroken. I was only humiliated, which is, in some ways, worse. It was the most she had said to me at once. She seemed to realize it and picked up the ledger again. "The count is 14 jars of seal brine short of what the kitchen's log shows," she said, returning to the business of the room. "I think there are breakages unrecorded from the summer. Someone should check the lower hall shelving." "I'll tell Aldrin," I said. I left. My wolf was not pacing. It was still settled, quiet and certain in a way it had not been in years, and I walked back to my own hall and stood at the long window and looked at the gray sea for a very long time. 2 days before the ceremony, I could not sleep. I walked the night corridors of the hold the way I sometimes did when the kingdom's weight was uncomfortable. Not long routes, just the inner circuit, the passage from the east-facing hall to the armory stairs and back. I had walked it enough times in enough years that my feet knew it without the lantern. She was in the great hall. Not working, it was the middle of the night. She was sitting at the end of the long table nearest the sea-facing window with a clay cup of something warm and looking at nothing I could see. She heard my step in the doorway and looked up without alarm. "My lord." "I couldn't sleep either," I said, because it seemed like the honest answer. She did not perform surprise or make excuses for her presence. She simply shifted slightly on the bench and looked back at the window. I came in and sat at the far end of the same table, which was far enough that no one would have anything to say about it, and close enough that talking did not require raising our voices. For a while we said nothing. "Are you afraid of the ceremony?" she asked. I looked at her. "Why would I be?" "Because you're going to have to choose," she said. "Or the wolf is going to choose, which is worse in some ways, because then you can't argue with it." She wrapped both hands around the cup. I know something about public ceremonies, where you find out something about your future that you didn't have a say in. It was the driest thing she had said to me. Not bitter. She said it with the particular flatness of someone who had decided that the memory was no longer worth the energy of bitterness. The wolf hasn't been cooperative, I said, which was more than I usually told anyone. What has it been? Restless for weeks. My counsel thinks it's anticipation. She was quiet for a moment. And what do you think it is? I did not answer that. She did not press. She drank from the cup, and we sat in the gray-lit hall with the sea sound coming through the stone. And eventually I asked her what the northern holds were like, and she told me she didn't know. She'd only her cousin's letters, and we talked for a while about correspondence and what it told you and what it left out. And it was the most ordinary conversation I could remember having in a long time. And my wolf lay still and quiet in my chest the whole time, and I did not know then. I was still telling myself I didn't know what that meant. I went back to my chamber when the hall clock struck the early hour. I did not sleep until nearly dawn. The day of the ceremony, Valther's hall held 40 wolves. My council had done their work well. The 3 presenting families sat in the first rows on the right. Morthyn of the northern pack, Edric of the eastern ridge, Castle Holt. I stopped. Castle Holt of the eastern ridge pack, the heir whose family had broken the betrothal in the Grafin Hall and left a woman to walk out alone. He was sitting in the 3rd row, young and well-dressed and entirely untroubled, next to a woman in a green gown who was presumably his sister, the candidate. He was watching the front of the hall with the ease of a man who had never had to calculate his own dignity. My council had not known. Why would they? It was the Eastern Ridge pack, an allied family. The candidate's name was Lys Holt. There was no reason for anyone to have thought to cross-reference with the packless seasonal worker in my household. My wolf was not pacing. It was not still. It was watching. The hall staff moved along the back of the room, setting the final candles in the iron holders along the wall. I did not look. I knew she was back there. I had seen Aldrin direct the hall arrangements that morning. She was doing her work with the same efficiency she brought to everything. Aldrin opened the formal proceedings. The first candidate was introduced, Morthyn's daughter, a capable-looking woman with silver-gray eyes and the bearing of someone bred to this moment. She walked to the center of the hall and stood before the pack. My wolf did not move. Aldrin moved to the second introduction. The Edric daughter, smaller, dark-haired, serious. She took her position. My wolf did not move. The third introduction. Lys Holt of the Eastern Ridge pack, 17 years old, Castle's younger sister, standing in the center of the hall in her green gown. My wolf moved. It did not go toward her. It turned the way a creature turns when it finally orients to what it has been searching for, and it walked inside me, deliberate and unhurried, toward the back of the hall. I felt it happen and went very still. Every wolf in the room felt it. I saw the shift, heads turning slightly, the attentiveness that the pack brought when a bonding sign began to surface, because the alpha's wolf was moving, and it had not moved toward any of the 3 candidates in the center of the hall. It was oriented entirely elsewhere. The hall had gone quiet. She was at the far wall with a candle holder in both hands, and she had gone still in the way of someone who did not understand what was happening and was waiting too. Her gray eyes were on the room, not on me. My wolf crossed the space between us, inside me, and also, somehow, outside, the way the old bondlord described it, the invisible thread that the pack could feel in the air of the hall. And when it reached her, it did what I had only ever read about in the old pack chronicles, the ones that described the great bondings of 3 centuries ago. It lay down at her feet. Not a dramatic gesture, not a display, a wolf reaching the end of a long search and recognizing the end of it. The hall did not make a sound. Castle Holt had gone pale. I saw it from the front of the room, the color draining from his face as he understood, in the sequence of a few seconds, several things at once. What the wolf had done, where it had stopped, who was standing at the back of his hall in a gray wool overgarment with a candle stand in her hands. I was already moving. I crossed the length of the hall the way you cross a room when the answer has been waiting for you longer than you knew. The pack watched. The three families watched. Castle Holt watched. She had not moved. She was looking at me with those steady gray eyes, and I could see the calculation happening behind them. The attempt to understand what the ceremony's movement meant, what the wolf at her feet meant, what it meant that the Alpha King of Vaelthur was walking toward her, and not toward anyone in the front rows. I stopped in front of her. She was still holding the candle stand. "Put that down," I said quietly. She set it on the nearest table. I unclasped my cloak, the gray and black wool of Vaelthur, heavy, the silver clasp at the shoulder, and I set it around her. My hands were steady. My wolf had stopped moving entirely. It was at peace in a way I could not remember it being in years, perhaps ever. The clasp fell against her collarbone. She looked down at it and then back up at me. "I don't," she began. "I know," I said. "I'm going to explain it, but first I need to say something in front of the pack." I turned to face the hall. 40 wolves, my council along the near wall, the three families in the first rows, Castle Holt in the third row, white-faced, very still. "The ceremony is concluded," I said. My voice carried the way it always did in this hall. Vaelthur's stone was built for it. "The wolf has chosen. This woman, Wren, daughter of Grayfin, presently in service in this hold, is my fated mate. I am naming her Luna of Vaelthur." The silence held for a moment and then broke into the low wave of sound that a pack makes when something old and certain has been confirmed. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition. The bond lore was old. When the Alpha's wolf chose, the pack felt it. They had all felt it. The only question had been where the wolf was going, and now they knew. I looked at Castle Holt. He was looking at Wren. His sister, Lys, was looking at the floor. The Morthane daughter and the Edric daughter were being quietly ushered toward their families by Aldrin, who had the expression of a man executing a revision with complete professionalism. I did not say anything to Castle Holt. I did not have to. He had sat in my hall and watched my wolf pass his sister and walk to the woman his family had dismissed as unmarriageable and packless, and a liability, and then watched the Alpha King of Vaelthur put his cloak on her shoulders in front of 40 wolves. Whatever accounting Castle Holt was doing in that moment was his own work. I turned back to Wren. She was looking at the clasp at her collarbone. Then she looked at me. "I'm not a candidate," she said. "I came to work Passage North." "I know," I said. "I have no pack, no family standing, no dowry." "I know." A pause, her gray eyes. "Your council is going to have strong feelings about this." "They are," I said. "They'll recover." The closest thing to a smile I had ever seen on her face appeared briefly at the corner of her mouth. She looked down at the cloak again, at the silver clasp. "I don't know what to say to you," she said. "You don't have to say anything yet," I said. "The ceremony is done. The hall is still full. We can talk later." She nodded once, the way she did everything, practical, contained, without performance. But she did not take the cloak off. Later, I mean the rest of the evening and into the night, after the presenting families had been properly seen off, Morthane and Edric with dignity, the Holt family with considerably more silence, and after my council had spent an hour in the map room making the face of men, adjusting to new cartography, and after Aldrin had organized the hall clearing with the efficiency that I valued him for. Wren and I sat at the long table near the sea-facing window. She had the cloak still, wrapped over her wool household garment, and someone had brought us each something hot to drink, and the hall was quiet. "Tell me," she said, "what this means." In plain terms, what happens now? I liked that about her. She did not perform being overwhelmed. She wanted the information. I told her in plain terms. The bond lore, the wolf's choice, was the oldest form of the recognition, predating arranged matings by centuries. It was binding in the pack law sense, meaning no council could override it and no competing arrangement could supersede it. She was named Luna of Vaelthur in the presence of the pack, that naming held from tonight forward, regardless of anything else. She listened to all of it with her hands around the cup. "And what you want," she said when I had finished. "What you want from me, not the law, what you want." It was a more direct question than most people asked me. I thought about how to answer it honestly. "I want you to stay," I said. "Not because the wolf chose you and the law names you, because I have been watching you for 3 weeks, and I have not yet found the end of wanting to keep watching, and I think that is not going to resolve itself." She looked at me for a long moment. "I was going north," she said. "I know. I was going because I thought there was nothing left for me where I came from." "I know that too." Another long pause, the sea sound through the stone. "I had made my peace," she said carefully, "with the idea of a quiet life, a small life, a cousin's spare room in a northern pack and useful work, and maybe, eventually, no longer thinking very often about the hall in Grafen where everyone watched and no one said a word." She paused. "I was not looking for anything." "Neither was I," I said. "My council arranged it. I stood at the window and watched the sea." The corner of her mouth again. "Your wolf," she said, "how long was it restless?" 3 weeks. She looked down. I could see her working through it, the arithmetic of 3 weeks, the first morning in the courtyard with the firewood, the kitchen yard, the drainage channel, the storeroom, the night conversation at this same table. "It knew before you did," she said. "It always does," I said. "That's the old lore. The wolf knows first. The man argues with it for a while and then catches up." "And are you caught up?" I looked at her. The gray eyes, the steady gaze, the cloak's silver clasp against the gray wool. The woman who had asked for the hard jobs so she wouldn't have to think, who had managed firewood with the economy of someone who knew exactly how much strength they had, and was not going to waste a gram of it. "Yes," I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, that single, decisive nod of hers. "Then I'll stay," she said. "Not because the law says so, because I think you're honest and I'm tired of things that weren't." "I am," I said, "honest, often inconveniently." "Good," she said. "I'm inconveniently honest myself. It's been a liability." "In Vaelthur," I said, "it's a qualification." She looked at the sea for a moment. Then she looked back at me. "Tell me about this hold," she said. "All of it, everything you know about it." And I did. We talked until the sea changed color. That is the only way I can describe it. The shift that happens before dawn, when the gray-black water goes to dark pewter, and then, slowly, to the particular cold silver that comes before the light. Vaelthur's hall faces west, so we could not see the sunrise, but we could see the sky go from black to dark blue above the cliff top, and I knew by the light that it was past the earliest hour. She noticed it too. She looked at the window. "I should have slept," she said, not with any real regret. "So should I said. She rose from the bench and pulled the cloak closer, and I stood, and for a moment we were both simply there in the early morning hall with the candles burning low and the sea doing what the sea did. "One thing," she said. "What?" "The Holt family," she said. "They'll be back in the Eastern Ridge by tomorrow, and people will talk the way people always talk when a ceremony ends the way this one did." "They will," I agreed. "I don't care about that," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not going to spend the next year being publicly dignified about it or making a performance of not caring. I simply don't care. Castle Holt sat in your hall tonight and watched your wolf walk past his sister and choose the woman his family called a liability. He can live with that. I looked at her. I do care, she said more quietly. About one thing, the ones who said nothing in the Grafen Hall, the ones who sat there and watched and went home after. I don't want them to matter. I'm working on it. I understood that. I knew about the particular weight of bystanders, the ones who do not participate in the cruelty but do nothing to interrupt it, and how somehow they sit heavier than the ones who acted. They saw tonight, I said. Even from a distance word travels. They know what the wolf chose. I know, she said. I know. And then, with the dry honesty that I was already beginning to understand was simply her mode of speech. It shouldn't matter that they know, but it does matter. I'd rather it didn't, and it does. That's honest, I said. I said I was. She left the hall, quiet-footed, pulling my cloak around her against the pre-dawn cold, and I stood at the long window and watched the sea come up silver. My wolf was sleeping. For the first time in weeks, possibly longer, it was simply asleep in my chest, the way a creature sleeps that has stopped searching. My counsel recovered. Aldrin's expression of professional adjustment lasted approximately 2 days, and then he began treating Wren with the careful regard he gave to things he had decided to respect, and after a week, there was no sign that he had ever done anything else. The Holt family sent a formal letter. I read it once and filed it. Wren did not ask what it said. The northern cousin sent a letter too, after Wren wrote to explain she would not be coming. I saw her reading it at the table. When she set it down, her expression had the look of a woman who had received something unexpected. She's pleased, Wren said. She says she always thought I'd end up somewhere I was valued. Cousins often know things before we do, I said. So do wolves, she said, and that was the nearest she came to a joke in those first weeks, and I remembered it for a long time. The mating was formalized before the month's end, in the old Vailthor manor, small, witnessed by the council and the household, without ceremony. We stood at the long window of the hall and said the words that the bondlore prescribed, and my wolf stirred in my chest when she spoke her part and then went quiet again, satisfied. She wore a deep gray dress that Elva had arranged, one of Vailthor's colors, and the silver clasp that had been on my cloak now held a small braid of her hair. Elva had suggested it, and Wren had considered it for a long moment and then said simply, "Yes." I put my hand on hers when the words were done, and she looked at it, and then at me, and then she said, "Now tell me about the winter provisions. Aldrin's salt storage accounting still has a gap, and I want to reconcile it before the cold sets in." I laughed. I am not sure when I had last done that. It sounded strange to me briefly, and then simply natural. "After the evening meal," I said. "After the evening meal," she agreed. She did not become someone different when she became Luna of Vailthor. That is the thing I want to say most clearly, because in the stories the bondlore tells, there is always a transformation, the Omega who becomes luminous, the girl who blossoms into queenliness, the hidden worth that suddenly shines outward. Wren did not shine outward. She was the same person she had been in the kitchen yard with the firewood, economical, honest, direct, quietly capable of more than she announced. What changed was the rest of the hold. The pack noticed, not in the way of a performance but in the way of creatures who felt the alpha's wolf at rest and understood what that meant. The bondlore was old and the pack's instinct was older. When the alpha king's wolf was at peace, Vailthor was at peace. They moved differently in her presence, not deferential in an uncomfortable way, but settled, the way a room settles when the window that has been letting in a draft is finally closed. She was the answer to a question the pack had been asking without knowing it. She noticed this too, which was characteristic of her. "They look at me differently," she said to me, 2 weeks into winter. We were in the east-facing hall, going over the cold season accounts, because she had become the most efficient manager my provisions had seen, and Aldrin had simply started routing things through her. "The pack has felt the bond," I said. "The wolf's choice is part of their lore too." I'm still the same woman who was scrubbing drainage channels. Yes, I said, that's the point. She looked at me. The wolf chose you because of what you are, I said, not what you were presented as, not what your family arranged or what your pack called you, what you actually are. The pack feels the difference. They can tell. I paused. So can you. She was quiet for a moment, then she looked back at the accounts. 14 jars of seal brine, she said. I was right about the shelving. 3 of the lower hall brackets had shifted, and a whole section of autumn stores was listed in the wrong column. Aldrin found them this morning. He told me, I said. So the count is correct now. The count is correct. She made a small, satisfied sound and noted something in the ledger. We went back to work. The Eastern Ridge Pack sent a delegation in midwinter, as they always did for the seasonal trade negotiations. Castle Holt was not among them. He had stayed home, which I thought showed a degree of self-awareness he had not displayed at the ceremony. The delegation's senior representative was a man I knew from previous years, competent and direct, and he did business with the Hold the way business was done. And if he found it necessary to acknowledge Wren's position at the council table, he did so without visible discomfort. Wren treated him exactly as she treated everyone, directly, with the specific information they needed, without performance. After the negotiations, she told me he had been pleasant to work with. He knew, I said. Of course he knew, she said. Everybody in the Eastern Ridge knows. Word travels. She paused. He chose to be professional about it. I have more respect for that than I expected to. I thought about Castle Holt at home in the Ridge Pack, while his representative sat across the table from the woman his family had publicly dismissed. I thought about the particular quality of that accounting, the kind that cannot be settled but must simply be lived with. I did not say any of this. Wren did not need me to. She had said it herself in the early morning after the ceremony, when she told me she was working on not letting the bystanders matter. I had watched her, through the winter, doing exactly that, not publicly, not with any announcement, simply the daily work of it. Doing her job, doing it well. Setting the seal brine account straight, reorganizing the winter provisions, sitting at the council table and giving her opinion when she had one in the direct, specific manner that made the council members, after some initial adjustment, simply consult her as a matter of course. She was making the bystanders matter less by making other things matter more. She did not perform healing. She just worked, the way she always had, and let the work be its own answer. By the time the Coast Road thawed and the first spring season workers arrived at Vailthold's outer gate, Wren had been Luna for 4 months, and it had become, in the way of things that are right, entirely unremarkable. She stood at the courtyard gate the morning the first wagon arrived. She had asked to coordinate the seasonal intake herself, because she said she remembered what it was like to arrive at a strange hold and want clear information and a direct assignment. She spoke to each of the new workers plainly, what the work was, what the expectations were, what the hold provided in return. She did not do it with any warmth she had not earned from them yet. She did it with honesty, which she had always offered, and which was, in the end, more useful. I watched from the corridor above. My wolf was asleep in my chest, the way it had been sleeping since the night of the ceremony. Not inert, I could feel it, present and calm, the way you feel a fire through a wall, warm, steady, certain. She finished the intake, and turned to head back inside and looked up and saw me in the corridor window. She made the small acknowledging nod. The same one she had given me in the kitchen yard on the first morning, when I had been the Alpha King crossing the courtyard at first light, and she had been a seasonal worker with a load of firewood, and we had been nothing to each other yet. I nodded back. She went inside. The sea was doing what it always did, throwing itself against the base of the cliff in gray churning swells, spray catching the iron lantern light, dissolving into nothing. Vailthor's coast, Valther's morning, the same as it had been before any of this and would be after all of it. The hold had its answer. The wolf had its rest. I went back to my work.